The room smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and the faint metallic scent that military buildings always seem to carry, as if history itself clung to the walls. Recruits in polished uniforms stood rigid in rows, their expressions locked somewhere between anxiety and forced bravado. The overhead lights hummed softly, casting long bright rectangles across the polished floor. In the middle of that tense atmosphere stood an elderly man with silver hair, thick glasses, and a weathered jacket that looked older than most of the recruits in the room. His posture was straight, but not stiff. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had once lived through storms, greater than anything these young Marines had ever imagined. Across from him, a Marine lieutenant impossibly young, broad-shouldered and filled with the kind of loud confidence that only comes from rank mixed with inexperience, stabbed a finger toward the old veteran's chest. His voice cracked through the room like a whip, bouncing off the walls and forcing every recruit to hold their breath. "What kind of call sign is Tiger Medic?" The officer barked, leaning so close that the brim of his white cap nearly touched the old man's forehead. The veteran didn't flinch. His eyes didn't widen, his breathing didn't change, and his hands remained quietly folded in front of him. The recruits felt the tension coil around them like a rope, pulling tighter with every second of silence. The lieutenant paced in front of the veteran, glaring as if he expected the old man to break into apologies. But the veteran remained still. His eyes held something none of the young Marines could describe: an old fire, not aggressive but deep, like the glow of an ember that had survived a long and brutal night. The lieutenant jabbed his finger again. "Answer the question, old man. What kind of call sign is that supposed to be? Tiger Medic? Who gave you that? A children's cartoon?" A few recruits swallowed hard, some unable to stop their eyes from flicking toward the veteran. They were too new, too inexperienced to understand whether this was some kind of test, or a disciplinary demonstration, or something else entirely. They only knew that the old man hadn't reacted at all, and that confused them. When someone in uniform yelled, people reacted. That was how it worked. But the veteran simply adjusted his jacket and blinked once, slowly. "I asked you a question," the lieutenant shouted, his voice rising even louder out of irritation. Another officer standing in the background, older, calmer, watching quietly, shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Some part of him seemed to recognize the veteran, or at least felt uneasy about the young lieutenant's attitude. Still he waited. Everyone did. At last the old man spoke. His voice was low, steady, and carried no hint of disrespect. "That call sign," he said, "was earned." The lieutenant scoffed loudly. "Oh. And what makes you think you're standing in front of anyone who cares about some fairy tale story from 40 years ago?" The old man gazed at him quietly. 57, he corrected. The lieutenant stiffened, annoyed. "What?" 57 years, the veteran repeated. "It's been that long." His voice carried a softness that contrasted sharply with the tense atmosphere around him. The recruits leaned in, just slightly. The lieutenant folded his arms. "All right then. Enlighten us. Tell us what makes Tiger Medic such a legendary name that an entire hall should stop what they're doing and listen to you." There was mockery in his tone, but also something else: curiosity, unintentional, creeping through the cracks of his arrogance. The veteran let out a breath. Not a sigh of frustration, more like someone opening a door to a memory. "We were deep in the jungle," he began, "and the canopy was so thick that even the sun felt like it was afraid to come inside. My unit had been ambushed. 3 of our men were down. 2 more were pinned. The rest were scattered." His eyes shifted, not unfocused but distant, as if he was seeing the scene play again in front of him. "We had radio contact, but our medic had been hit within the first few minutes. We were trapped, surrounded." The recruit's expression slowly shifted. The room seemed to grow quieter, as if the fluorescent lights softened their hum. The lieutenant maintained his rigid posture, but the muscles in his jaw tightened. The veteran continued, speaking without theatrics. The enemy had moved closer. Close enough that we could hear them. Close enough that every breath we took had to be silent. And when our medic went down, someone had to get to him. Someone had to get to the wounded. He looked down at his hands briefly, then back up. So I crawled. The lieutenant's face twitched. You weren't a medic. No, the veteran nodded. I wasn't, but someone had to get to them. So I did. The old man went on, describing how he had crawled through the wet jungle floor, how bullets snapped through the air like angry insects, how every inch he moved felt like it would be his last. And yet he kept going, reaching one wounded Marine after another, dragging them out while the enemy closed in. There was a tiger in the trees, he added, almost as an afterthought. Watching us. Not attacking. Just watching. A tiger, the lieutenant muttered skeptically. Yes, the veteran replied. A tiger. The men saw it. Big animal. Orange eyes. It followed us as I pulled them through the brush, almost like it was guarding us from behind. When we regrouped after the extraction, the survivors started calling me Tiger Medic. They said the tiger protected me while I protected them. He paused. I didn't like the name at first, but they insisted. The room fell silent. The lieutenant opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the older officer in the back finally stepped forward. His face was pale with recognition. Sir, he said quietly. That's... He stopped himself, swallowing. Then he said more firmly, that's not a fairy tale. The young lieutenant frowned. What? He's telling the truth, the older officer said. Then he turned to the recruits. This man is a decorated combat veteran. Highly decorated. The recruits straightened instantly, their eyes widening. The lieutenant blinked, suddenly unsure of himself. But the older officer kept talking. Tiger Medic is a call sign we learned about in training. Not a nickname. A legend. A man who saved an entire patrol after the medic was killed. Every officer in this building should know that story. The lieutenant's face drained of color. His posture faltered. He looked at the veteran with embarrassment beginning to rise in his throat. But the veteran didn't gloat. Didn't smirk. Didn't even look offended. He simply stood there with the same calm he had shown since the beginning. I'm not here for recognition, he said softly. I just came to drop off some old documents. That's all. The lieutenant swallowed hard. Sir, But the veteran lifted his hand slightly. No need for apologies, he said. You're young. You'll learn. There was no bitterness, only patience. That patience cut deeper than anger ever could. The lieutenant nodded awkwardly, humbled. The recruit stood straighter, watching the old man with a new reverence. When the veteran finally turned to leave, the room stayed silent. Even the lights seemed to hum more quietly. And yet, just before he stepped out the door, the old man glanced back over his shoulder and said, Take care of your men. Every one of them. That's what matters. Rank comes and goes. But the people you stand beside, that's forever. Then he walked out of the building, leaving behind a room full of Marines, who suddenly felt that the ground they stood on echoed with stories far greater than their own beginnings. Asterisk. The tension in the hall was different this time, thicker, heavier, as if the very air recognized that something important was about to unfold long before any of the people inside realized it themselves. Rows of polished boots lined the floor in immaculate formation, every recruit standing straight, chins lifted, eyes fixed forward with the stiff determination of men who wanted to prove they belonged. The ceiling lights glared down harshly, casting a sterile white glow across the room that made the atmosphere feel even sharper. At the far end of the hall, by a long table stacked with folders and outdated filing boxes, stood an elderly man wearing a faded windbreaker, a pair of worn-out boots, and the expression of someone who had been summoned for something he neither requested nor particularly cared about. His hair was thin and white, his face lined with decades of stories no one had asked to hear yet. He held an envelope in his hand, the edges softened by time. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't fidgeting. He simply waited, quietly, calmly, too calmly for the young Marine, lieutenant who stormed across the polished floor the moment he saw the old man standing there. The lieutenant's boots struck the ground like thunder, and his face was tight with irritation and superiority. He marched right up to the veteran, chest puffed out, jaw clenched, eyes burning with the kind of forced intensity that inexperienced officers often use to hide their insecurity. Several recruits exchanged nervous looks. They felt the pressure in the air thickening like smoke. The lieutenant stopped inches from the old man's face, voice exploding before the silence could settle. "You're the one they sent us waiting for. You're Tiger Medic?" His tone practically dripped disbelief and sarcasm. Some recruits actually flinched at the loudness of the shout. The old man didn't blink. His fingers remained gently wrapped around the envelope, and his eyes, tired but clear, met the lieutenant's glare without even the slightest sign of intimidation. The lieutenant jabbed his finger toward the veteran's chest with the same aggressive energy from the thumbnail image. "What kind of call sign is that? Tiger Medic? Who gave you such a ridiculous name? And more importantly, who thought it was a good idea to waste my time with this?" His voice echoed off the walls, sharp as broken glass. A few recruits had to fight not to swallow audibly. They weren't sure whether they were witnessing a disciplinary demonstration or an accident waiting to happen. The old man simply answered in a steady, soft tone. That call sign was not given lightly. But the lieutenant cut him off immediately. "I don't care if it was given on a queen's throne. I want an explanation." The old man fell silent again, offering nothing but quiet patience. That quiet made the lieutenant angrier. He stepped closer. "Did you hear me?" Still, no reaction. The entire hall watched, breath held, waiting for something, anything to shift. Finally, the old man spoke again, this time with an acuity that sliced through the tension without raising his voice even by an inch. "I heard you," he said. "I was thinking how best to answer a question from someone who doesn't yet understand what he's asking." The lieutenant's face reddened instantly. A couple of recruits widened their eyes. Nobody breathed. The older officer at the back of the room, who had been observing, quietly straightened, as if sensing something important was about to be revealed. The lieutenant spat back. "What's that supposed to mean?" The veteran didn't answer the question. Instead, he slowly opened the envelope he was holding. Inside were 4 photographs, faded but still clear enough to recognize the setting. Dense jungle. Wounded soldiers, a medic's bag torn open. And in one picture, a massive tiger in the background. Half hidden by leaves but unmistakably present. The lieutenant blinked, the edge of his confidence cracking. The recruits leaned forward, their discipline nearly slipping under the weight of curiosity. The old man lifted one of the photographs, holding it out toward the lieutenant without arrogance, without smugness, just calm certainty. "This," he said, "is where the name came from. But it's not the whole story." The lieutenant hesitated, staring at the photo, unable to deny what he was seeing. The veteran continued. "We were ambushed. Nearly wiped out. Our medic was killed early. We had no one left to treat the wounded. I wasn't a medic. I wasn't anything special. But the men needed someone. So I went." His gaze drifted toward the younger recruits as if addressing them too. "Fear does strange things to people. It can freeze you or move you. I crawled through that jungle for hours. Mud in my mouth. Blood in the leaves. Gunfire so close I could feel the heat of bullets snapping branches above my head. But the men needed me. And that was enough." His voice never rose, never trembled. He continued, describing how he treated each wounded soldier using only what he remembered watching medics do: improvising bandages, applying pressure, dragging bodies through undergrowth. Every time I stopped to help someone, he said, I felt eyes on me. I thought it was the enemy, but it wasn't. He held up the second photograph. The tiger. This animal followed us, quiet as shadow. Close enough to kill us all, but it didn't. When the men realized it was there, they said it was protecting me. That it moved when I moved, paused when I paused. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe the world just has strange ways of showing mercy. But when we finally reached safety, the men started calling me Tiger Medic. His eyes softened. It wasn't a name I asked for. It was the name of survivors. Men who lived because someone decided fear wouldn't win that day. The hall remained silent long after he stopped talking. The lieutenant stood frozen, torn between disbelief and a dawning understanding. He looked at the veteran, really looked at him now, and for the first time saw something beyond the old jacket and tired eyes. He saw a man who had once carried more weight on his shoulders than some officers carried in an entire career. The recruits sensed the shift too. Their expressions changed from confusion to respect, quiet and deep. The older officer stepped forward, his face pale with recognition. "Sir," he said quietly to the veteran, "I didn't realize." "If I had known." "Doesn't matter," the veteran said gently. "I'm not here for recognition. I came to drop off my service records and some documents the archives asked for. Nothing more." The lieutenant swallowed hard. His earlier arrogance now felt too heavy to bear. I was out of line," he said, voice lower, unsure. But again the veteran shook his head. "You're learning," he replied. "You'll make mistakes. The important thing is that you build yourself from the right things after those mistakes." His calmness was not forgiving in a patronizing way, it was forgiving in the way of someone who had seen too much to hold small errors against anyone. The lieutenant lowered his gaze, humbled. The veteran reached into his envelope again and pulled out something else, an old patch, faded, torn. The recruit stared at it with reverence. "This belonged to the medic who didn't make it," the veteran said. "I carried it with me for decades. Not as a reminder of death, but as a reminder of responsibility. Medics don't choose who they save. They just do their best with whatever they have." He handed the patch to the lieutenant. "Keep it, not as a trophy. As a reminder to treat every soldier under your command like someone whose life depends on the choices you make." The lieutenant accepted the patch with trembling hands. For a moment, he couldn't speak. The veteran gave a small nod, then slowly turned to leave. But before he reached the door, the older officer called out, "Wait." Everyone looked toward him. Would you honor us by speaking to the recruits sometime? Tell them your story? Teach them something we can't teach from books?" The veteran paused. Then he smiled barely, softly, but enough to warm the coldness of the room. "Maybe," he said, "if it helps them become the kind of Marines who protect each other the way we once had to." The older officer nodded with deep gratitude. The recruit stood even straighter than before. Even the lieutenant seemed transformed, holding the faded patch like a fragile piece of history that suddenly meant everything. The veteran walked through the doors and out into the sunlight, leaving behind a hall full of Marines who would never forget the day they learned that legends don't always look the way you expect, that sometimes they walk quietly, carrying nothing but memories and a faded photograph of a tiger watching over wounded men in a jungle long ago.